Photoactive, a podcast about photography and technology. I'm Kirk McElroy.
And I'm Jeff Carlson.
You can find show notes, including any photos we discuss in this episode, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. We couldn't afford the M. This episode is sponsored by Luma Labs, maker of the Luma Loop 3.5, the modular, quick-adjust sling featuring hard-mount technology. We'll tell you more about this later in the show. This week, we welcome Dan Bracaglia. Dan works for DPReview, and he takes pictures. And we wanted to get Dan on to talk about product photography, because what Jeff and I like to do is find things we know nothing about, then invite guests who know a whole bunch of stuff about it, and get them to teach us things for free.
Hang on a second. It's not that we don't know anything about it. You and I have done a lot of product photography in the past, shooting all sorts of things for reviews and articles, but we want to take this to another level.
Right. We haven't done it very professionally. Anyway, Dan, thanks for joining us.
It's nice to talk to you. Be here. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Jeff just gave out the gist of the idea, is that as technical writers, we're often called on to make some product photos. I did an iPhone review a few weeks ago, needed a photo of the iPhone. I did an Apple Watch review. I took a photo of the Apple Watch, and they're good, they're serviceable. I know how to shoot photos, but there's a lot more to product photography to that. Now, I understand that you're the guy who does all or most of the product photography for DPReview?
Yes, that's correct. I would say 95% of it. Okay,
so cameras, lenses, gadgets, bags, tripods, everything.
Yeah, I would say it's mostly cameras and lenses. That's kind of our bread and butter. But anything you can think of that looks somewhat mundane or like an electronics, that's what we photograph.
What's the smallest thing you've ever photographed? Man, a micro SD card, maybe?
Yeah, probably, honestly. I mean, we've done some accessory roundups where, you have to get something that kind of looks interesting, and maybe it's a micro SD card. So for sure, lots of macro lenses.
And what's the largest?
The largest thing I've ever photographed was probably before I worked for DPReview for a publication called Sound and Vision. They'd bring in giant big screen TVs and big speaker systems, and that was always a fun challenge in a tiny office to figure out how to drop a backdrop and make it look good.
But if I understand correctly, you've really got a studio in DPReview where you do this, right?
We do, yeah, which is it's a nice thing to have. We have a good amount of space, a couple of lights, a nice camera stabilization system. So, yeah, we have the space to do it. We have the materials, and it's sort of just wherever your mind can take you, that's what you do.
So I've been to this studio, and it's really impressive in the sense that, just to sort of describe it for our listeners, it's basically a big black room, of course, no windows, because you don't want any reflections, as we've dealt with, just shooting, like Kirk said, iPhones and things like that. You have so much glass and metal and reflections, it can be maddening. And there's basically just this corner set up that has all sorts of backdrops that you can grab and lighting. Can you tell us a little bit, like what are the components that are there so that, if somebody wanted to set up something, even if it's not at that scale, like what are the things you need? Obviously, camera, some way to stabilize the camera, some sort of lighting. Do you need like lots of lights? Like what's?
I think that's a great question. I think the basic thing is you can really do good product photography with even just one light. As long as it's a nice soft light source, even a window will work. So the lighting setup I use is just two lights. One has a softbox, one has an umbrella. But I'm actually in there a lot with big pieces of foam core, the things you can get for $3 at the craft store, big white foam core, and using that to reflect and bounce. And I'll even sometimes have two of those with my arms kind of going crazy like an octopus trying to get the light where I want it. But you don't actually need that much gear to get the kind of shots you want, or to get shots that look clean and functional.
So that's something I wanted to talk about. I've been doing flower photography recently in the past few months. I do it on my desk, which is where I am now. There's a window to the left. It faces east. So other than early in the morning, I've got, soft light. Yeah. I put a black background over my iMac and my speaker, and I just set things up like that. And what I found is that I would much rather not even worry about a light and just use long exposures. Now, lights are good because they're going to give you shadows if you want them, but if you don't want shadows, what's the difference if your camera's on a tripod between having a light and shooting a long exposure? In my case, 2 or 3 seconds.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think either way really works well. You're just trading the amount of light for exposure time. I guess the advantage in having light sources and not doing long exposures is you can move a little bit more quickly, where that might not be as important for you because you're doing this creatively and trying to make something that's interesting or beautiful to you. So either way is actually a great way to do it, and that's actually a great alternative if you don't have light sources that you can turn up and turn down. Is actually just using window light and putting your camera on a tripod and letting the exposure go for a bit.
And my tip that I mentioned a few weeks ago is always set the timer on your camera so you don't press the shutter and shake the camera.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can use a cable release or something, but it's even easier to use a timer. My camera has a 2-second and a 10-second timer, so I set it to 2 seconds. I press it, it stabilizes, it shoots. That's
a great tip. I do that all the time, even when we're using fast shutter speeds, because it's just an easy way to avoid unwanted errors in your work. And actually, to your point about long exposures, there's a product called the Ice Light. That's the name brand, but it basically looks like a lightsaber. It's a strip of LEDs in a tube, and sometimes we'll do long exposure photography for product shots where we'll use that on a 2 or 3 second exposure and wave it around, basically creating the light where you want it. And that's a really fun. That's something I'll do when I have some free time and I want to have a little bit of fun with it. So, same exact concept though.
Another tip, I use the flashlight on my iPhone sometimes when I want to get a corner of a flower with a little bit of light. I have a standard reflector that you have to twist into a pretzel to fold up.
Right.
And that works a little bit. The problem is that it doesn't focus on a specific area, whereas if you take a cell phone flashlight, then you can get a smaller area highlighted if you want.
Definitely. And I'll do the same thing with long exposures in product photography. We'll just use a flashlight with a very dense point of light and use that usually for lens reflections to kind of bring out that cool, glowy, trippy lens look.
So the one thing that I discovered when I started doing this is I left my camera on auto white balance. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't really a good thing. So what do? Do you put a white card someplace when you start shooting all the time?
So with our lights, they're daylight balanced, which makes it really easy. You can just throw it on little Sony logo and everything's good to go. But that's actually, I think trying to avoid auto white balance, especially if you're going to use window light or you're going to use a light source in your home, is a really good idea. And yes, a white balancing off a white card is 100% the best way to get as close as possible to what you want. And it's something that once you learn how to do it, it takes about 5 seconds to do, and it saves you a lot of time in processing.
What else do you need to know about the technical side when you're doing product photos? I think Jeff said you use a pretty old camera for product photos. You don't use anything, with a 50 megapixel sensor.
And the thing is, most of our images are going up between 1,200, 2,000 pixels wide, so they don't have to be incredibly detailed. It's not a billboard. So we actually, for years, we used a Canon D30, which, that camera is old. Now we've upgraded to an 80D, or I'm sorry, a 30D. Now we've upgraded to an 80D, which has just been superseded by the 90D, which I just had the pleasure of reviewing. Sorry, that was a non sequitur.
That's fine.
But you really, it's not that important. The idea, I think, what I always try to do, what's nice about product photography, is you can get the frame exactly as you want it. You don't, maybe if you're shooting something out and about, you're going to crop in a little bit in post. That's no big deal. But you can really use, the entire resolution of your sensor and not have to worry too much about cropping, which is nice. I would say a macro lens is one thing that is really, really helpful because it's nice to be able to push in. Sometimes you want to get a tight logo, you want to get a detail, and that just makes it so much easier.
Yeah, and when you pull out, your macro lens is going to be a pretty long focal length anyway.
Exactly.
So you're going to be able to pull out and get the whole product.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just another sort of way to keep things quick and easy. You get the light you like, you take the full product shot, and then you zoom it on in and get something that's a detail, and then you move on to whatever you're shooting next.
So it sounds like this is really quick. How long does it take? Let's say you're shooting a new camera. How many different angles are you going to shoot? How much time would you spend doing this?
So I would say it'll probably take between an hour and an hour and a half. We usually do everything from front of camera with a focus stack, so front of lens, and then the camera in focus, and then I'll just do that in Photoshop, combine the two. We'll do a shot of the sensor, the top plate, the battery compartment, the connectivity points, the LCD, the control panels on the back, the electronic or optical viewfinder if there is one, comparison shots next to some competitors, comparison shots next to previous generations. And then I'll get into, once that's all done, that probably takes about 30, 40 minutes. It's pretty quick. I'll get into the fun stuff where I like to string the cameras up on fishing wire and drop colorful backgrounds behind them and just kind of get weird with it and see what sticks and what doesn't. And that's the part that I really enjoy, is just getting interesting looking images of a camera, basically making this camera look like something it isn't, like it's a spaceship flying through Alderaan or I don't know.
Like it's a Death Star.
Exactly. 2001: A Space Odyssey is a big influence in my product photography.
Yeah. We're going to link to your website, and in your product portfolio, there's a lot of photos like that. So how do you hang them on a wire? What do you connect the wire to on the camera?
So I just have an arm. So basically have a light stand with an arm that comes out that's pretty tough. And I just use fishing wire. I'll get about the height I want, stack it on an apple crate, tie them up real carefully. With the bigger camera, you've got to be really careful. And then, the problem is sometimes they sway back and forth. Yeah, it's hard to get them to stop moving.
But then what do? You clone out the fishing the fishing line afterwards?
That's exactly it. So I used to use thread, and we found the fishing line was just a lot easier to get rid of. So
yeah.
It doesn't take too long. The healing tool actually does a really great job.
Yeah.
God bless Adobe.
So I'm thinking of another tool that I find useful when I do stuff like this. You get one of those really soft, fluffy makeup brushes.
Oh, yeah.
Because of all the little bits of dust that you didn't see when you were shooting, but once you get it on screen, they just stand out like little tiny sparkly flashlights.
Yeah. That's a great point, and that's actually something I overlook far too often. Is a thorough deep cleaning before shooting product photography is an absolute must. Yeah. Same with canned air. Canned air is the greatest thing in the world,
especially for the sensor. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can retouch to get rid of a lot of that. And that's generally what I do if there's anything left over. But it's true that you can save a lot of time doing that.
Absolutely.
So, what other products do you shoot? Just cameras, or have you done other product photography?
Oh yeah, so I mean, Jeff just did a great article about the iPad Pro, and we had a fun little session where we kind of came up with creative ways to make the iPad look, interesting and a little bit different than perhaps it's been shown. But it's mostly consumer electronics. I do a lot of that in terms of the actual in-studio product stuff.
That's part of the stuff that I find interesting about this because, obviously, once you get past that initial list of all the angles that you need of, your camera, of your object, just for the practical considerations, because those are the things that are going to be discussed in an article, what have you, then trying to make it look different or creative, do you get inspiration from other things, or is it just completely on the spur of the moment, hey, let's see if this iPad will stand up on its own? Well, it doesn't quite, but we can put a little something behind that, and maybe, the pencil will be at a weird angle. I mean, part of the reason why we wanted to have you on for this is because I really enjoy just watching you work and watching you move things around, and the fact that you were moving quickly, and you also didn't seem to have a big plan. It was just, okay, what if we go super close in on the Apple logo? And now how about if we just set it at an angle against a red backdrop, or see if there's a reflection? Does that just come out of, oh my God, I've done this so many times, I need to think of something new, or what?
Yeah, I have so much fun doing it. I think that's kind of what it comes from. My background in photography has always been photojournalism, so product photography is pretty much the antithesis. And being able to work very meticulously with sort of just let's just see what happens attitude, it's really exciting to see an image just appear before you. And so I do just sort of, you know, I might have a little bit of an idea of how I want to do it, but no, I just kind of play with it and see where it takes me, and try to not to get too sucked in and use the time constraints that I have to move forward. But I'm a big fan of making product photography that is very graphical in nature and very eye-catching in nature, because I think it's so consumer electronics, you know, people talk about them, they're sexy, they're this, they're that, but the photography, other than what's being put out by their brands, doesn't necessarily always reflect how sexy they are. It's hard to make a smudged up piece of glass look good. And so I think it's exciting. It's an exciting, it's just a challenge, and I just like to have fun with it.
And a lot of product photography that brands release is not photography. It's 3D renders.
Exactly, yeah.
So when you see an Apple product on the Apple website, these are not photos of Apple products, so they don't have to worry about the dust or the light. You know, they do all this in a 3D program. They get the exact shading, the exact position, and it's cheating. It's not photography.
It is. And I will say, though, shooting all this stuff, there is definitely in the back of my head, I have ideas of certain ways of doing it that work and certain ways that don't, things that I've just come through trial and error of figuring out. And I honestly think that's the key to product photography, is just trial and error, because it's so easy to see what works and doesn't, and to move along and try something new. And I often get super discouraged and even walk out of the room and come back in, and then move something around in just the right way. I'm like, oh, aha, you know, actually, this isn't terrible. This can look okay. So.
Okay, let's take a break and hear from our sponsor, and we'll be back in a few minutes and learn some more about product photography. Everyone needs a camera strap that is both comfortable and practical. The Luma Loop lets you carry your camera as a sling, so you can get into shooting position almost immediately. When you're not shooting, the aluminum and carbon fiber slides on the strap hold your camera snug to your body and keep it out of the way. But the quick-release design means your next shot is never out of reach. The new Luma Loop 3.5 features a redesigned mount and aluminum D-rings that make it less likely that the loop will get tangled or twisted. An updated QD loop for users of Really Right Stuff plates features a new aluminum mount that is stronger, lighter, and has the same low-profile ring design as the regular loop. 2 new Arca mounts will be launching in early November. All the materials are American-made, and Luma Labs offers a lifetime guarantee on everything they make. PhotoActive listeners can get a 10% discount through the end of November 2019 using the code PHOTOACTIVE. That's PHOTOACTIVE in one word. Go to luma-labs.com to order your next favorite camera strap system. That's luma-labs.com. Okay, so one thing that drew me to this, and I mentioned earlier, is the flower photography that I've done. And Jeff and I got to talking a few weeks ago about that and about product photography for articles. And essentially, these are both forms of still life photography. Do you do any other types of still life photography?
Not a whole lot. I do a little bit of portraiture just through part of my job also with DPReview, writing the camera reviews.
And as long as the people are alive, it's not a still life.
Exactly right. I've recently gotten a little bit more into, I have a garden at my apartment, and I love shooting in the garden. So I do that kind of stuff, but that's all natural light. So no, for the most part, the only product photography I do, or still life, is really just product stuff.
And product photography goes quite far. When you look at, I don't know, food photography, when you get your Sunday newspaper and there's a magazine with recipes, these are all, you could call this product photography. It's the same techniques, isn't it?
Yep. Anything that's not moving, I would call that product photography.
One of the big differences is that food changes over time. You can't let it sit there for an hour under lights. It's going to dry, congeal, things are going to happen. So have you ever been involved in a shoot like that? Because I find that an interesting process. You've got a time constraint.
I have, yeah. I've shot a couple menus for restaurants in my day, which is always fun because that's exactly the challenge. Is it changes very quickly.
Yeah. I saw someone shared a video on Twitter last week. It shows how, so you've got a pizza and there's a slice cut and you put a spatula and you pull it up and the cheese comes dripping off. And they showed how it was done. They nailed down the pizza on either side of the slice. And then they took like some Elmer's glue or rubber cement and mixed it with something to make the cheese look cheesy. And all of that stuff. And you see some of these. What was one of the things that I saw? If you're doing pancakes, use motor oil instead of maple syrup, because the motor oil looks more realistic than the maple syrup does. The maple syrup just soaks into the pancakes, and the motor oil drips around the side. It made me realize that in most product photography, there is trickery. Now, not with what you're doing, because you've got hardware, so it's different.
Pouring motor oil over the camera just is not a good idea.
But it's interesting the lengths that people go to be able to shoot their products to make them look realistic. Now, in what you're doing, I'd say it's closer to like catalog photography. We have to show something exactly as it is. People are going to look at those photos thinking, do I want to buy this camera? Is that button right over there? And it's got to be clear enough and well lit and enough shadow to stand out. So you really don't have that many options, do you?
No, you really don't. I would say we kind of split it, though. The lead image photography will get a little bit weird. You know, I might use a wide-angle lens and sort of distort just a little bit to make it look like the camera's jumping out at you. But the vast majority of it, we're trying to be as true to scale as possible and as honest and direct as possible, because we're trying to help consumers. We're not trying to, pull a fast one on anybody.
Yeah, you have a limit on the creativity that you can use.
It's true. I would say, other than some of the lead images, and that's the thing. We break it down between photos that tell the truth and photos that are just interesting and grabby. So there's a little bit of wiggle room.
Photos that tell the truth. Now, we could do a couple of shows about that. Do photos really tell the truth?
Earlier, you mentioned painting out the fishing wire. I'm a little curious about how much post-processing you do, and even going down to the basics of like, do you shoot everything in RAW, or is that just a big waste of time? You just shoot in JPEG because your environment is controlled so well.
Yeah, I always shoot RAW plus JPEG, and depending on time constraints, I try to get as close to right as I can in camera, so the JPEGs can just go right off. And honestly, Canon's JPEGs colors look great. That's what we use. It's a Canon camera, and a lot of times I will just go right into the JPEG. However, occasionally I want to add a little bit more dynamic range, pull the shadows. So post-production's pretty low-key. Other than some adjustments to exposures and curves, I'll open it right into Photoshop from Adobe Camera Raw, clone out the fishing wire, take a look at dust spots and little smudge spots that I may have missed. But I don't go too crazy. I used to work in print where you really had to zoom everything into 100 and make sure everything is gone. Thank God I don't have to do that anymore. So no, it's honestly a pretty light lift post-production wise. And that fishing wire is a lot easier to get rid of than it may sound.
It doesn't sound easy, but I guess it is, because the tools we have now are so, the AI and machine learning and all that stuff, they're really so efficient. I've seen, you can clone people out of a photo in a landscape and it still looks real. We're getting to the point where photos don't tell the truth anymore, do they?
No, they really don't. It's scary.
So when you do DPReview, you never use photos that are provided by the brands, do you?
No, we don't. We try to maintain our own sort of visual tone and visual cadence, and that carries through to our Instagram account and our other social accounts. My goal as photo editor is to make sure we have that our photos get stolen the most. I want people to rip off our product photography because it looks really good. I want it to boil to the top of Google image searches.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's no real benefit there, but I think it's good to have that visual tone and to have it be related to a brand.
Well, the benefit is that someone's looking for a photo of a product and they may end up on your website, and so you get page views.
There you go. Exactly.
And so
I'll go with that.
Good-looking photos do attract people. Although, to be fair, good-looking photos of cameras kind of get boring after a while, unless you really have serious gear acquisition syndrome.
Well, unless you're at that point where you're like, I need a new camera, and then you've fallen down into 4 hours of Google searches.
Exactly.
And you're looking at every little tiny speck. I mean, that's kind of the advantage of DPReview. Like, you can find out exactly like every little tiny detail. Sorry to make a plug for them, but that's just the way it is. Like you want to get lost that's where you go.
And that's what we try to provide is, maybe the pretty picture of the camera floating in space is what gets you in the door. But then, hopefully all the tests and the rigor is what keeps you there.
Well, I'm going to just veer a little bit because there's something I've been thinking about lately. On DPReview or any other site, the new camera comes out and, here's sample photos taken with this camera. And everyone has nice-looking sample photos because they've gotten rid of the bad ones. And I don't see any point in looking at sample photos. Now, I might, if I'm looking at a specific lens, let's say a wide-angle lens, and I want to see, well, although even though I wouldn't know if the software has corrected some, vignetting or aberrations or whatever. But in most cases, sample photos, they all look fine.
Yeah, I think sample photos are definitely more useful for lens shopping than camera shopping. Especially given the fact that a lot of cameras have the same sensor. And so if it's a known quantity, it kind of comes down to the photographer and the scenario in which you're shooting. That being said, people love sample photos. That's their prerogative to enjoy them, and we provide them. We just, at the very least, try to tell you what we've done to these samples after we've shot them. So our lens samples, we always turn everything off so you can kind of just get an idea of this is what the lens is at its purest, and then sometimes we'll include here it is with corrections, so you can also understand what you might get.
Plus, I don't know if this is on every set of sample photos, but often you can download the raw photos from DPReview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we try to give you everything.
Yeah, so that way I can grab some photos, get the raw files, and look at how they really look instead of looking at your interpretation of them. Exactly. And I think that's fair. But otherwise, you see some random blogger blogging about this new camera lens and, these wonderful sample photos. Here's the beer bottle on the bar with the background blur and, Yep. It gets a little bit boring after a while. But hey, people have to make a living. I guess so. I was just on a trip shooting a new camera, shooting the same sample photos as 10 other journalists who are going to have the same pretty pictures, but that's just how the industry goes, I guess.
One thing I'm curious about before we wrap up, as you've done this, have you noticed specific trends in product photography? Because a lot of times you've got like the object and everything is super soft focus in the background, or maybe there's more of a designer look now. Is that something that's sort of shifted, or is it kind of all over the map?
I think it's really gone two directions. I think you see publications and sites with really good graphical product photography, and then you have the exact opposite, which is almost like the YouTube version where it's used, it is what it is, it's in the field, it's grimy, it's smudgy, but it's real. And I think that's kind of how it's sort of splitting in those two directions, which is really interesting. You have sites like Wired and Wirecutter and all the big tech blogs. They do really good product photography. But that's not to say that the real world stuff doesn't tell the same sort of story. It's just maybe not quite as grabby. Okay. Dan, thank you very much. We're going to learn from this so we can improve our product photography. If anyone else listening doesn't need to do product photography, just remember all of these techniques apply to any kind of still life photography. Whether it's flowers, whether you're taking photos of things you're selling on eBay, there are lots of cases where you may want to do still life product photography.
And I think this is all stuff that is a lot easier, even at the higher levels, than I expected. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of practice and repetition to get it right. But, again, it's another one of those photo things where you don't need to go out and spend $1,000 on lighting equipment to get started. You can use a window.
You can use a window. That should be... I'm going to put that quote in my Instagram profile. You can use a window. Dan, thanks so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay, it's time for our snapshots. Jeff, what have you got this week?
So this week I have something on review for something I'm going to be writing about in a while. I'm not really sure. It doesn't have a due date yet. I have a SanDisk Extreme Portable SSD. So it's a little hard drive, basically, but of course it's not a hard drive because there's nothing spinny inside of it. It's just an SSD. It's teeny tiny. It's like the length of my index finger, And
it's even smaller than an iPhone SE.
It's even smaller than an iPhone SE. This has 2 terabytes of data on it, which is kind of crazy.
Yep.
And it's weather sealed, it's water resistant. So it's because it's an SSD and because it uses a USB-C port with a, I believe, USB 3.1 connection, it can transfer data up to 550 megabytes per second. So that is, I mean, it's certainly fast enough that I can run, say, another operating system that I've not yet installed on my computer yet because Catalina's a little shaky right now. But, you know, for photographers, this is great because this gives you an option to, you know, back up your photos in a very small enclosure, something easily portable. It even has like a little loop that you can connect, you know, a carabiner or something to it.
And how much does this cost? Because 2 terabytes, that to me sounds expensive.
2 terabytes is surprisingly not terribly expensive. So the 2 terabyte version is like $270 at Amazon. So, you know, definitely a good chunk of money. But it's also 2 terabytes. The 1 terabyte is more reasonable. It's about $170, and the 500 gig version, which is also, you know, perfectly good if it's something that you're just using to take, you know, and back up your photos on a trip or something, is less than $100.
Wow, that's good. So let me get this straight. You need a dongle that connects to it to put your SD card in, right?
No, your SD card doesn't connect to this because there's no interface for it. This is just storage.
So how do you put storage on it?
So you connect it to your computer and transfer over.
Okay.
Or if you have a recent iPad Pro running iPadOS 13, you can connect via USB-C on both ends, and the Files app will now let you transfer photos directly to external storage. So, for example, you could import photos into your iPad in the Files app, and then make a copy of them to this as your secondary backup copy. That's
pretty interesting. That's tempting. The 500 gigabytes is tempting. I wouldn't need 2 terabytes, but at that price, and of course you can use it as an SSD for anything else to back up your computer or store files or whatever.
Exactly. Or, you know, if you're also recording video, that's really good for something like this.
Okay.
Kirk, what do you have this week?
I have a new book because I haven't talked about a book in 1 episode or 2.
We cannot have enough books. There's no limit on books here. We love books.
It turns out that Michael Kenna has a whole bunch of new books coming out. And when he told me about this one, he said, it's this phone book-sized book of my photos called Beyond Architecture. And that made me think of 2 things, totally off topic. Is 1, we're both old enough to remember what a phone book is. And 2, he was talking about the phone books that we used to get back in the day. The last time I got a phone book was this spring, and on the cover it said this would be the last one that's given out here. It was Yellow Pages, and it was about the thickness of, I don't know, a slim volume of poetry or something.
Wow.
But anyway, this is a massive book. It's about 400 pages. Beyond Architecture. And I think that name is chosen because a lot of the photos are of architecture. And I talked about Michael Kenna's book, Rouge, which was about a Ford plant in Detroit a while back. Some of those photos are there. There are photos of bridges. There are photos. Here's one of the Sydney Opera House. Here's the Empire State Building. But some of the photos are not quite architecture. Some of them are just random street photos in Japan, and some of them are fields. And I think what it is that it's a publisher who decided to make a big book with a lot of different photos, but to limit it to certain types of photos. There's a photo of Stonehenge. Technically, that's architecture, but it's not really the same. He has another book coming out, a French publisher, he told me, had noticed that he has a lot of photos of birds. And so he's had Michael Kenna go through his archive and take all his photos of birds. So it's going to be a pretty big book of Michael Kenna's photos of birds coming out next year. And he has an interesting way of titling photos. In fact, I think one of the ones in the exhibit that I went to in July was called 242 Crows, or whatever type of bird was. So he likes to count them all precisely. In any case, this is a big book. It's heavy. It's not very expensive. I think it's $60 in the States. And if you don't have any Michael Kenna books yet, then get this one. Thanks for listening to Photoactive. You can find show notes, including any photos we discuss in this episode, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. We couldn't afford the M. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/photoactivecast. That's photoactivecast in one word. You can subscribe to Photoactive in your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts. See the links on our website. And think about leaving us a rating or review in iTunes or in your podcast.